Okay, I think we're live. I'm hoping, I mean, it says we're streaming, so we're live online and obviously here in the classroom. Welcome. It's been a number of months that we've been planning this, so we are grateful that you all are here online and here in the classroom. And to have this all finally come together is just fantastic. So, the Claremont Institute for Process Studies. This is our little learning lab, and this, as I mentioned in the email that hopefully everyone received, this is our first time. And so just bear with us. If there's some problems with the sound, if there's some problems with the video, if there are some problems with the communication, if anything is a little bit off, we run into anything, just bear with us. We'll get it fixed hopefully this week. And if we don't get it fixed, we'll get it fixed next week. But there's going to be probably a few hiccups because this is our first time, which is actually very exciting because this is really part of a larger vision, I think, not just kind of a one-time event or a two-time event, although we definitely hope to be doing this same thing in the springtime as another event. But we want this to be part of sort of a revisioning of education itself. We are hoping that we can rethink what education not only has been, as I think we'll be talking about today, but also, or at least over the course of the coming weeks, but also what it might be in the future. And one of the main principles that we're concerned about, or ideas that we're concerned about, and something that John is going to talk a lot about, is the importance of values in education. And in particular, right now, one of the values that we are most concerned about is using or being centrally concerned with an ecological civilization. What does education look like if you are centrally concerned with working toward building a truly ecological civilization? So that's our larger vision. We're hoping to expand this and grow this together with our hosts here at Middletree. My name is Richard Livingston. I'm the Director of Operations at the Claremont Institute for Process Studies. And I'm kind of, I don't know, as far as this course is concerned, I'm sort of the TA plus. and I add the plus, a big giant plus, because I'm the guy that's responsible to make sure the website works. I'm responsible to make sure the registration system is working. I'm responsible for keeping this live stream up and running and, the class communication. I'm basically responsible for everything besides the teaching, the stuff you're here for. What you're really here for is to hear from him, right? So I'm responsible for everything else. And so talk to me. I'm happy to answer your questions. So here in the room, come talk to me if you have any questions or concerns. And offline, outside of class, or to the people who are online right now, send me an email. I'll be checking email during our class sessions, and I'm happy to respond. So it's easy to remember, just richard@claremontprocess.org. Let me just I want to just take care of a few simple logistical stuff. I want everybody to take out their phones right now in the room. Please take your phone out. You're not going to turn it in. So this isn't high school. I'm not going to make you put it in the basket and go tuck it away, but I'd like everyone to take out your phone right now. I'm going to kind of do the same thing. However, you know how to put your phone on silent, flip the switch or change the settings so your phone is on silent. Right? If you need to keep an eye on incoming calls or texts, no worries. And by the way, if we hear a little background noise, we're right next to a train station. And so you may hear some trains from time to time. But yeah, it's fine if you need to take calls and get up and walk out. But just put the phone on silent to save the distractions. Let me just say a couple of words about asking questions here in class or online. Here in the classroom, since there are several dozen other people online, and we wanted to make sure everybody could hear okay, that's why I'm holding this microphone. Okay, so I know you in the room could hear me just fine if I stood like this, and John's microphone could probably pick me up just fine, but we want the experience to be as enjoyable as possible. So when you have a question or a comment, I think we're happy to do that. Turn around to me. I'm going to be right back here behind the camera. Turn around to me and kind of wave your hand. I'll bring the microphone over to you. We just need to make sure that it's on. when you ask your question, and it's about, you just hold it about like I am right now. I've done some testing with this, and if you hold it like this, really hard to hear, it's just a little bit off. So just try and hold it about like this and speak as clearly as you can, and then everybody will be able to hear, and John won't have to repeat the questions. So asking questions online, for you who want to ask questions online. We're using, as you can see now, we are using YouTube Live to do the stream. And with YouTube Live, it does require that you log in to a Google account if you want to ask a question in the live chat. And I realized a little too late that there may be people who don't have Google accounts, or you might not be comfortable creating a Google account. And so between now and next week, I am going to come up with, I'm going to install or set up an additional option so that you could use our website to ask questions, probably set up a discussion forum or something like that. But for those people who are not comfortable creating a Google account and don't have a Google account, go ahead and send me an email for today. I'm going to be monitoring my email. So just send that question to me, and I will, as I said in my message to you earlier this week, I'll be glad to try and relay that here in the classroom so that John can respond either today or next time. Lastly, right here on the board, I've put here a couple of things. And if you want to do this, you're right. For anybody who's interested in tweeting or posting about this, we're not on Instagram right now, so we're just on Twitter and Facebook. But if you want to include us, whatever you want to tweet or whatever you want to post, just include these two things. This @ tags us at the Claremont Institute for Process Studies. It tags us both on Twitter and Facebook. And this hashtag, I don't know, if you all like it, if you all want to come up with a better hashtag, let me know. This is just kind of what I thought of this morning, the Claremont Cobb course. We'll just call this the Claremont Cobb course for our little hashtag if you want to tweet. So add that in, and maybe, who knows, maybe we'll see a little conversation grow on Facebook or Twitter. So that's our hashtag and our @. And let me just say 2 words of thanks, and we'll get going. So I want to say thank you, first of all, to our host, Joe Atman, who is the director of Middletree. And I'm going to let Joe come up and talk a little bit about what Middletree is, but I definitely wanted to say thank you to him because he has generously offered this space to us and has been extraordinarily accommodating. And I also want to say that this isn't just what I hope will be the beginning of something for the Claremont Institute for Process Studies, but something that I hope will be the beginning of a long-term partnership with Middletree. So Joe, why don't you come on up and you can say a little bit more about yourself and what Middletree is all about. And
great. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, all of you, for being here. We're really excited to have this going on. As Richard just said, this is something that we hope is going to be a lasting relationship between the Process Center and Middletree. John and I go back a little ways. So this is kind of coming full circle for us. I know John. I was a graduate student here at the Claremont Graduate University a number of years ago, and studying the philosophy of religion and theology. As a PhD student, I heard nothing but John Cobb this and John Cobb that, and I went, who is this John Cobb guy? Because I really didn't know anything about process. I didn't know anything about John until I got to Claremont, and so I was really excited one day because I had to read a lot of John's stuff. I got to hear a lot of his lectures, a lot of his talks. But never really got to meet him. So I was really excited one day when a friend of mine, my mentor and very, very close friend of mine, introduced me to him one day. And I think for those of you who know John, I think it's safe to say that he was nothing like the person that I had thought that he might be, someone of his stature and of the kind of achievements that he has done, in this field and just in generally in his life. He was someone who I, again, was just so humbled by and impressed by. he immediately made an impression on me, as he has so many of us. And the relationship that he and I sort of cultivated over the years actually became one that was much more of a personal one in nature. Especially after this friend and mentor figure of mine passed away. I really didn't know what to do. I had a very difficult time with that, and I really didn't know what to do with my life. I was very involved with this gentleman. I worked with him. We had a very close personal relationship as well, and I kind of came to John, for some counseling and just as a friend, and he shepherded me through that time. And it was at that period of my life that because of this sort of existential crisis, I really as I mentioned, I thought having a degree in philosophy, that was what I was going to do. I was going to have to be in traditional academia and go through that grueling process of being an academic. And John really gave me the permission to leave that field, at least in a formal manner. And that's why I created Middle Tree. Middle Tree is a nonprofit organization that is created and run by educators. And our mission here is to make supplemental education available to people by making it affordable. And it's a program that, to my knowledge, is unique in all the world in that it allows for students to come here for unlimited amounts of time. We tend not to turn folks away due to finances, but we also want to calibrate a program around each and every individual student. Of course, this is something that no school really has in mind to do. There are very, very few learning centers that, if any, that take this approach of really building a program around the individual student. However, this is, of course, kind of a process notion, right? This sort of individuality, this sort of creativity that happens in and around learning. And as Richard said, that this is something that here we're sort of really trying to make a difference and really change the way that education looks, to really change the way that we approach education. And that is, amongst other things, Middle Tree's mission as well, is we really believe that we've stumbled upon a potential, if I can be so audacious, a fix towards so many of the problems that we have here in academia. We level the playing field by allowing people to be here regardless of finances, and then we give them all the time that they need to work here. People come here for unlimited amounts of time. It kind of works like a gym membership. Students come whenever they want to. They stay for as long as they need to. They work on whatever they have to while they're here. And because of that unlimited time, we're able to create a program again in and around the individual. So, as I always say to John, there's really, and again, being that he allowed me to and gave me this sort of permission to say, maybe do something else. Maybe there's another path towards this. There's not a lot that I can do to thank him. So the only thing I really can do is to share him with all of you here and all of you out there online. And that's what we're doing here today. And that's why I'm so excited to have this come full circle. And thank you for wanting to do this here, John. And thank you for all, again, for being here. Thank you to Richard. And we're really looking forward to this partnership, not only here, but in the future.
Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome.
I appreciate that. Yeah, this is genuine. And my end, I want to, echo so much of what Joe said and say one more thank you and then turn things over to John. My thank you is to John. And that is both on a personal note, but also because of what's happening here. John and I have had a number of conversations over the years. I've been involved with the Center for Process Studies. Ever since I came to Claremont, I moved here in 2006, January of 2006, to begin my own PhD journey. It's a lot longer than I ever thought it would be, but over the course of that 9.5 years, I was involved in one way or another at the Center for Process Studies. And so was really, really excited to learn that the Institute was organized. So I want to say thank you for a couple of reasons. One, because the Claremont Institute for Process Studies, it was not a one, excuse me, it wasn't a one person effort. And it took the help of a number of volunteers, and its survival is continuing to happen because of the generosity of a number of wonderful, committed people. But John, without John's vision and drive and the gathering that he had for several years in his home, it simply wouldn't have happened. So the Institute is a thing at all, really, in large part because of John Cobb. This class certainly is, and this is completely his, and we're so grateful to him for donating his time and sharing his talent and sharing his wisdom with all of us. So with that being said, John, thank you very much. We won't do this every week, but we wanted to do it at least the first week as we get this started, and we're going to be here together for the next 10 weeks. And so thank you.
Okay, and I don't have to have that. I'm told I'm hooked up,
You're just fine.
so I'm good. Thank you so much for all of this. I hadn't expected this kind of beginning for the course, and because of the way in which it has been introduced as an effort to do something fresh in the field of education broadly, I will begin by saying something about how I'm understanding this effort. And then after I've talked for a while, and I don't know, that may be 20 minutes or it may be longer, I sometimes have trouble sticking to a limited time. I want everybody to introduce themselves because, of course, one of the things I think we would all agree is that we need to work as communities and not, obviously, there's nothing to compete about here since there are no grades, no certificates, no nothing. There's nothing to compete for, but still to know each other and learn from each other when we have opportunities is so much better than just having a one-way relationship. Now, I have been deeply concerned about the fate of humanity, well, almost exactly 50 years. And 50 years ago, well, in 1970, I wrote a little book called Is It Too Late? Which meant that already then we understood that human behavior had been for a long time unsustainable, and it was getting worse. And the question of whether that could be human survival, or at least the survival of civilization, was already there. Now, unfortunately, I can't say that prospects look better now than they did then. We are already now actually experiencing the horrors that we were predicting or expecting in a still relatively remote future back in 1970. And we have, as a humanity, I'm not talking about individual people, but just collectively, we have given much higher priority to enjoying our wealth and increasing our wealth. And that means the wealth of leadership, because the majority of people on the planet are not much better off, even financially now, than they were 50 years ago. But some people, the number of billionaires has exploded, of course, and so forth. And they are usually the same people who are able to call the shots, and the rest of us have allowed them to carry us deeper and deeper into trouble. So my view is that this is the context in which we need to think together. And genuine education should be that kind of thing. Unfortunately, our educational system has actually become more irrelevant as time has gone by. It really is worse than simple irrelevance. It teaches competition at a time when cooperation is urgently needed. And unfortunately, the worldview that shapes it is the worldview that has led us to self-destruction. So in a way, this whole course is about what has this set of ideas that has been shaping our society, and the set of ideas that is needed. And I must say, in spite of my distress about the little progress that has been made, the time today is riper than it was 50 years ago for overturning the fundamental assumptions of society. I put it in terms of a series of ages. I mean, it's very, very common to talk about the Roman civilization and then the medieval civilization and modern civilization. And of course, some of the problems that we face characterize all of them. I mean, farming was unsustainable from the beginning. It's just that the areas that became deserts as a result of farming, you could move somewhere else. But now you can't move anywhere else. And farming has intensified its assault upon the land, poisoning it and using up its topsoil and so forth. So it's both that we can't move and that what we're doing gets worse and worse rather than better and better. But at the same time, there's far more interest in organic farming today than there was 50 years ago. There are lots of wonderful experiments going on. In other words, we know what to do. The issue is, why don't we do it? And we are making some progress. So I don't want to just be pessimistic. I really think that we know, and that more and more people are interested. Yesterday morning, I was with Randy talking with the mayor of Pomona about possibilities of developing farming and gardening all through the city of Pomona. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I just mean conversations of that kind are going on. So I want to simply do what I can to support a shift. And the shift is from modern civilization to postmodern civilization. And because postmodern leaves completely blank what happens, I like calling it ecological civilization. That's suggestive. Of course, whatever language you use doesn't really matter, except that we need a common language. So we recognize that we may be working in many, many different ways. Our interests may focus, I've mentioned agriculture, but they may be directly on education. They may be on economics. They can be on all kinds of things if we all understand that we're working for a deep change. In my view, modern civilization is visibly collapsing. And in order to say that, I need to explain how I understand modern civilization. And I want to make it clear, I don't think modern civilization is such as something demonic. Medieval civilization was something either good or bad. It's not that kind of a question. But modern civilization has done a lot of good things, but it is also bringing an end to humanity. And that is such a seriously bad thing that we can't afford just to be gentle and say, oh, well, gradually it will evolve into something better. There's no assurance of that at all. It seems to have been evolving towards something worse in terms of the top leadership. But there's so many human beings who know better and who are committed to doing better and who are already part of what I call ecological civilization. So I think we can put our emphasis on the birth pangs of something new rather than altogether on how bad it is that we are continuing some things that are old and out of date and worse than irrelevant. But I'm going to, the way I have set up this course is to take basic ideas. Today I put down freedom and determinism. These are topics that are widely discussed. The modern world has been based on deterministic metaphysics. And that doesn't mean that everybody is a determinist. It just means that that the whole educational, I don't even call it educational, schooling system is based on theories that support that. And it gets worse as you get higher up the line. I don't know that any of the academic disciplines in which people get PhDs really affirms that human beings are free. But I paired this with the notion of meaninglessness, because if you really believe, I don't think anybody does, but it's a shame to have an educational system or schooling system that tries to teach what nobody believes, and what, if we did believe, is utterly destructive. And that's what we are trying to do today. But I think that's fragile. I think the whole schooling system is about to crash. And when I say that, it's what I hope. Because it needs to be rebuilt from a very fundamental point of view. And I like to call it a new civilization to make it clear that this is not tinkering with existing institutions that are built on assumptions. I mean, you can make improvements tinkering around the edges. But what we need is to just rethink the whole thing based on assumptions that most of us already believe. And it's because we already believe these things. Most of us here in this room, I'm sure, already believe most of the things I'm going to try to persuade you to believe. Well, in other words, I'm not trying really to change your minds. I'm trying to say there is a coherent way of putting together what you already know that goes much deeper, is more adequate even by modern standards. Why can't we make that shift? Well, we can, but the obstacles are still enormous. I think it would be wonderful if our universities were geared in a different way, if they were repeatedly asking the question, are we doing as much as we can to resolve the greatest problems of humanity? But that is not what a university prides itself on today. Harvard University advertises itself as a value-free research university. Being value-free is held up as an ideal. I had a painful, well, there's a book that I had already read, written to college teachers. Its title is Save the World on Your Own Time. Very explicit statement. That's not what our schools are supposed to do. If you happen to be interested in saving the world, it's okay, but just don't think you're being paid for that. You're being paid to advance an academic discipline, and the academic discipline is value-free. Now, all of this at a time when I think the great majority of people who are teaching in college care about the future of the world. That's why you have to tell them, set that aside. You see, the tension between our most prestigious universities and what we all really believe. But surely that's fragile. And I have seen a few recent statements by people, prestigious people in universities saying, are we doing as much as we should be doing? to avoid global warming? The answer is obviously no, they're not. But at least the question is being asked. I know I'm kind of talking on both sides. I consider our situation desperate, and I consider all of our major institutions making it worse. At the same time, I think they are so out of touch with the reality that the time has come to proudly take hold of things that are not allowable in universities and say, obviously, this is the truth. These are the important issues. Let's educate ourselves about them, organize ourselves to do something about it. And I think there are lots of colleges which, if the issue is presented to them in a really clear way, would say, we don't want to be value-free. We really want to help the students who come. And we also want to do something about the condition of the world in which they're going to live. I really believe if we could just make the issues clear and get them before people, most of us will not make the wrong choice. But you get very little help from academia in generating any reflection about academia. That's the one topic universities won't discuss. No, it's not the only topic they won't discuss, but they will not discuss what universities should be. That is not part of the curriculum in any part of the school. And when they get together, when the presidents get together to discuss their problems, that's probably not likely to come up. How to finance them would be the big issue. And when you try to be value-free, one value remains: money. So our schooling system is based on money, making money. We do think we should help our students to get a better job. That's the one value that has not been excluded. Okay, well, let me just say a little bit more about what I mean by modernity. The term is used a lot. So, and my mentor, Alfred North Whitehead, wrote a book called Science and the Modern World, in which he described science, modern science, as sort of having done what it can do and preparing the way for a new science. So it implied something after modernity. He thought William James provided a basis for moving beyond modernity. But he did not use the term postmodern. But you can see how easy it is to call what comes after the modern postmodern. So we in the process community have been calling ourselves postmodern for 40 years, I guess. No, we haven't been making a great deal of it. So when the French came and talked about the postmodern, we decided we couldn't just use that language anymore because they are primarily deconstructing. And don't misunderstand, I think there's a lot to deconstruct. I will be deconstructing too, but so important to construct that we didn't want to be people to think we were just another branch of that. So we've been calling ourselves constructive postmodernists. So what I'm trying to do is to deconstruct the ideas on the basis of which the modern world has accomplished many, many great things and also is leading us to destruction. And then to offer another set of ideas, which if deeply internalized, and I don't think any of them are hard to internalize, but then but it's the prestige of modern institutions that I would like to undermine. If we could stop thinking, oh, he's a university professor, therefore he has authority, and recognize he's a university professor, therefore he has probably been socialized into a set of modern ideas that are very destructive. That's not his fault. I don't want to sound like I'm attacking people. And the great majority of people have learned how to be inconsistent. And we can thank God for that. I don't think, well, I'll give you one simple example. Some of you may have heard the name of Rudolf Carnap in the days when positivism was the rage. He was one of the leaders, and he was at Chicago when I was there. So I sat through a course that he was giving, and somebody asked him, well, now, is this the way you think and act when you go home? Oh, of course not. It has nothing to do. But to have school having nothing to do with what real life is about, it just angers me. That is not what that's not what I want my children to learn. And yet we have passively stood by and given great prestige to the institutions that have been misdirecting us for a long time. Okay, so I take, you can periodize in all kinds of ways. I periodize from the first half of the 17th century as being the beginning of modernity. And two specific developments there seem extremely important. One of them was the rise of ethnic nationalism. And ethnic nationalism, I think, I mean, nothing begins and ends at a certain time. You can certainly trace the roots of ethnic nationalism earlier, and we're realizing right now there's a resurgence of ethnic nationalism. But Europe was the place where ethnic nationalism took hold, and then European empires spread it to places where it didn't fit at all. But at the end of World War II, the same people who had initiated ethnic nationalism decided to turn over national sovereignty to a wider community and establish the European community. So I consider that the mark of the end of ethnic nationalism as being the great thrust that everybody looks to as advancement to a time when one recognized, very thoughtful people recognize something else. And by now, if unfortunately modernist ideas of a special sort, but in any case, United States imperial ambitions have prevented Latin America from doing something like what Europe did, and Africa from doing something like. We killed Gaddafi because he had a chance of creating an African Union that was really significant. And we are now engaged, not for the first time, in destroying Venezuela, because Venezuela has the best chance of creating something. I'm trying to say the deeper forces are moving the world toward African Union and Latin American Union, but there's huge resistance, and the United States is the leader of that resistance. Okay, so I'm saying ethnic nationalism characterized modernity. Now, if you go back to the Middle Ages, self-definition of people was primarily religious, Christian, in the case of Europe. But once you have ethnic nationalism, somebody is a Frenchman or a German or an Italian or whatever, or an American. So nationalism is a characteristic of modernity that is now resurgent, both in Europe and, of course, Trump is an ethnic nationalist to a large extent. So it isn't finished. I still think we experience it as a kind of aftermath of something that is no longer the fundamental impulse. And that's all you can say about these boundaries. You say something begins at a certain time. The treaty that I can indicate at the beginning of the period in 1648 was the Treaty of Westphalia, and they had been fighting for 30 years, fighting that was partly over the issues of whether we should be Catholic or Protestant. But at Westphalia, they decided the prince decides. So the primacy of the political over the religious was a huge fundamental shift, which took place gradually over centuries, but one can find specific loci for the emergence of that. In the Middle Ages, the church, it was understood that political rulers derived their authorities from God, and it was mediated by the church. Today, I don't think there are any political rulers who would talk about needing the church's support in order to justify who they are. But that began early. Of course, in England, Henry VIII, if the Pope wouldn't give him the right to do what he wanted to do, dismiss the Pope, I'll be the head of the church. It's that shift, which you can call a shift to secularization, that has shaped the politics of the modern world. And I think the push to do something that breaks out of that nationalism is actually a powerful force in the world today, even though it hasn't succeeded in accomplishing. But we know what to support. I don't think any of us in this room, at least, would say, oh, we must get back to ethnic nationalism. So it's already gone a long way. Okay, that's the other thing that I want to emphasize, and there are, of course, other things we could talk about it much longer, is that in the first half of that century, Descartes was developing his philosophical scientific ideas. Galileo was trying to persuade the scientists at the Vatican to look through a telescope. There's a fundamental shift from Aristotelian to Cartesian science. And modern science is Cartesian science. So I think that dating has considerable force. But Cartesian science, once we split the atom, Cartesian science was over. Now, unfortunately, it still controls all of our universities. But it cannot explain the phenomena that are most important. And scientists are in a fragile situation when they insist on using a language and a conceptuality that does not explain the cutting edge issues for science. Now, in my view, modern science never explained all the phenomena. So it has never, but there was a sense it was making progress in that direction. And toward the end of the 19th century, there were even physicists who told young people, I wouldn't go into physics, we've just done that job. That's completed. Well, obviously nobody would talk that way today. So we'll talk more about this, of course, as we go on. But I'm saying, once you split the atom and discover that the world is not made up of the kinds of things which people imagined atoms were, they never were what people imagined they were, but it's still, atomism had control over the way everything was being thought about. We could also say materialism had a control, because atoms were thought of as little bits of matter. We could also say determinism. And that's the particular topic I want to take up today. So throughout the course, I will be talking about the ideas that have dominated modernity on the one hand, and we need to understand them, really understand them, and appreciate the degree of success that they've had. Otherwise, we won't understand the enormous resistance And the greatest resistance is in our universities. So when I'm calling for a change of educational institutions, this is not a minor matter. If we could change but of course you can't change your educational institutions as long as the people who benefit from them, and they are largely shaped to produce people to serve the economic order. So there's huge opposition, but it doesn't express itself very effectively in theory. So when your institutions can no longer justify their own existence and don't even try, it's time that something else comes in and gives some kind of wholeness and conviction. There's very little conviction about important matters among young people today. And they're educated not to have conviction. They kind of naturally would have convictions, but if you go to school and be told not to have any convictions, and it goes on for year after year after year, and the most prestigious people are saying it, you may indeed end up as a nihilist. And nihilism is growing. But no society can afford to educate its youth for nihilistic. We just can't. So I'm hoping that you will be energized to say, we know better. We are not going to be intimidated by so-called experts. They don't know what they're doing, or they're doing sort of stuff that is, they know, if they know what they're doing, they should be ashamed of themselves. But experts are those who have been socialized carefully into some particular academic discipline, and the academic disciplines are value-free, and value-free cannot produce wisdom. Wisdom is about what to do. It's about understanding what is happening. Values are all over the place. Aiming to be value-free is aiming to be abstract and irrelevant. So what I would like for us to be confident that our time is coming. We know better. We can create new institutions that will actually benefit humanity. Students will benefit from being in them. You just heard about this particular institution where we're located. It's doing it. It can be done. It is being done. I think Waldorf schools have been doing it for quite some time now. So it's not that we don't know what good education would be. It's that we don't want it. We don't want it bad enough to require it. And if we don't, I think we don't deserve to. So this is the background out of which all of our discussions, and today we're going to be talking about freedom and determinism. And I think these are familiar topics. And I think all the topics, I don't think you should feel I'm being highly technical or something. Philosophers are so quickly dismissed, and Whiteheadians are dismissed. We're told we use a technical terminology. Well, when you press issues hard enough, you have to make distinctions that ordinary language doesn't make. You have to become technical. We will not press most issues hard enough to have to become very technical, but when we have to, I think we shouldn't be so resistant to technical discussions that we can't follow an argument through to its conclusion. I don't think any of you are. I'm just talking about our general culture. It's immediately. See, I think metaphysics is the most important thing to think about. And of course, the very word is immediately a turnoff for the vast majority of people who identify with irrelevance. Well, that problem is that their metaphysics can't be justified. And if you can't justify your metaphysics, you would like to think it doesn't matter. Okay. All right. I'm going to break now, and we're going to ask you to introduce yourself. Michael, please start, and we'll go down the line here. And take a couple of minutes. I mean, more than just name, but not a whole biography.
My name is Michael Whitmer. I live at Pilgrim Place here in Claremont. I'm a retired Deputy Attorney General for the state of California. And at this stage of my life, I'm particularly interested in community development and the community spiritual development in particular.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I think that's.
I'm Rich Loom. I'm also a Pilgrim Place resident. I guess my early education was with the Jesuits, and they said truth is one. And I was an engineer, and I said, okay, I hear what you're saying. But I went from the physics lab to Thomistic philosophy, and I would say, hey, these two languages really aren't the same. So, my quest as an adult has been the issue of science and religion, and how do the two meet, or how should they meet? And I know John has got something to say about that too.
Sure. Mhm.
Hello, my name is Ronan Hallowell. I'm an assistant professor of medical education at the Keck School of Medicine at USC, and friendly with John, and been coming to events out here for about 4 or 5 years, and a long history of interest in these issues. I'm excited to hear what we're talking about, and as many of you may have heard in the news, USC's been, having a lot of scandals and crises, and yet I think it's an incredible time. There's some new opportunity, and USC is actually launching a new values poll aimed at changing the university culture. And we have a new president, the first woman president of the university, and she's an environmental scientist. And there's a new provost at UCLA who's also an environmental scientist and committed. So as much as these institutions are very problematic,
Yeah.
there's also some great, I feel
Hope.
it in the air.
Yes. Good.
And
Good. Thank you.
hope to be a link and look forward to learning with you all. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Prince McMillan. Do you want me? I don't need to stand, right? I'm pretty sure you don't remember me, but I've taken classes with you. I also was in the PRT program at Claremont. I'm one of those that did everything except my dissertation. And
ABD.
I finally came back and I said, will you still take me back? And they told me all the process people were gone. So I'm trying to decide if I'm going to finish off that PhD. I'm an ordained minister. I worked for a number of years in churches. And then I got my marriage and family license and ran a mental health clinic for the last 15 years. And I am particularly interested in, if I ever finish that PhD, is using it in community building and healthcare. What I found is that more and more healthcare is looking at ethics and mission and looking to philosophy and religion to help inform that. And I was very excited when a friend of mine got a job directing mission for a healthcare system utilizing religious values and values that community values. So that's my interest area.
Good. Mhm.
I'm Donna Guadarrama, and I'm not involved in higher education or anything really important. I'm a saleswoman, but I'm concerned about the future, and I'm concerned about the lack of values that I see around me, and I want to be a part of the change. And I've been, taking some classes at the Church of Brethren with John, and I'm real excited about the potential for change and being a part of the bigger picture of introducing values into the educational system, and whatever I can do. I guess I represent the common man, so to speak, or common woman, or I always fall back on gender, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry.
Hi, my name is Matt Zaro. So I'm here because all the things you've been saying about the problems with education, I've been seeing in the mainline Protestant church, and
Yeah.
I've just been nodding along.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in reforming the church, and I grew up as a member of the UCC. I went and got my Master's of Divinity from Pacific School of Religion. I've been working in the church for about 15 years now, since I was 18. And I just left the UCC, and I'm starting my own church to try to support my reform movement. So,
Ah.
thanks.
Hello, my name's Elric Wardman. I have a history as a physics teacher and as an environmental, looking at schooling environmentalism. We had an state accredited academy at my high school and on environmental science. And we took kids through a 3-year program of that they were blocked into in environmental science, and worked with other schools. The both secondary, the junior colleges. We're not supposed to call them that anymore, I guess, but that level, and we transitioned kids from the high school into education beyond within the secondary system. In teaching physics, I made several attempts to move away from the current system, but I found that seniors in high school are already so adept, the good ones, are so adept at managing the system that making any changes was difficult from the bottom up through the students as it was from the top down. That is, the school board didn't want me to talk about things that weren't absolute, in quotes, absolute truths. And found that very difficult.
I'm John Gingrich. Some 50 years ago, I took a course from John Cobb, and that has been very influential in shaping my worldview and also my work. I worked for 37 years at the University of Laverne as a professor and as an administrator. And now I'm also part of the Claremont Institute for Process Studies. I'm on the board.
I'm Dick Tipping, an architect, retired, also at Pilgrim Place. And throughout my career as an architect, I've been able to be around John, probably now 58 years, John. So that's always been a credit to support taking actions as an architect. And finally, at this stage of the game, values are headlined for us. And it wasn't too long ago that I became acquainted with the terms awe and splendor. And to put that into form is where the architects should be going now, based on values. So this is going to be an interesting course to enlighten me, as well as other architects and students coming along, that what really counts in the long run. And there are very good examples of awe and splendor now, as well as back in the 1700s, there was. And that was, of course, maybe with that went a society that moved greatly also in maybe wrong ways, but there were good things too, which is the wisdom that will come out. And today, there are very good examples of awe and splendor that have the proper values. So that'll be fun to discuss in our class. Thanks.
Those sound like theological categories. I'm Ron Hines. I'm a retired United Methodist pastor. When I came in 1970 to the Claremont School of Theology for a PhD program in Christian education, I discovered John Cobb. I only had one class from him, but all the other classes were talking about John Cobb, and so I figured I'd better read it. I participated, John, in your workshop on alternatives to catastrophe back in the early 70s, and most recently on seizing an alternative in that 2015 conference at Claremont. Meanwhile, I've been a pastor in Washington State and a pastor and a seminary teacher in the Philippines.
So I'm Randy Beckendam. My daughter Amy and I operate Amy's Farm. So I'm a farmer. I met John at the Farmers and Philosophers Conference a year and a half ago. Personally, I'm deeply concerned with the theological underpinnings of our way forward. I've been a member of Purpose Church, First Baptist Pomona, for 50 years. I've found that journey very wanting and discouraging. My mentor the last 30 years by text has been Dallas Willard. But now John is becoming a mentor. So we believe very strongly in the power of sustainable agriculture to transform society, especially urban farming. And Pomona is open to that. Good meeting with the mayor yesterday. John has proposed a question to Pomona. Pomona is an official city of compassion. And John has said, what would it look like? Excuse me. What would it look like if a city of compassion decided to feed itself? So we're going to go with that question, hold the conference possibly. So stay tuned.
I'm Bob. Does this thing turn on? I'm Bob Barron. And, you know, it's a little bit almost wonderful and strange to have you talking like this, because I remember when I had my first federal job a long, long time ago, 1963, my boss said, "Get off your white horse." I kind of think this is the place for me to get back on my white horse. But I started to teach elementary school in 1965 in Berkeley, California. And in spite of what has been said in the press about different, what happened in that town, I had one of the first integrated classes at Cragmont School in 1965. That there's so much stuff. You know, you got my brain working so much overtime, and it's just it's hard to shut up, as you know. Okay, anybody else? I think I came to the right place. Oh, we do have 80 acres up in Oregon that we plan to farm.
Okay. Now, all right, we will now finally get to the topic of the day. Okay. And in order to do that, we simply need to understand the history of philosophy and science in the modern world. Now, in the medieval period, Aristotle was by far the most important philosopher and also the most important scientist. Obviously, modern science went way beyond him, but so we're not questioning that modern science did some good things, but it's very important to understand what specifically he rejected in modern science, in Aristotelian science. Aristotle talked about 4 causes. That meant 4 ways in which we should explain anything. And that would be equally true whether you were doing philosophy or science. The distinction had not really arisen sharply at that time. Okay, one way was material cause. And that means, what is a thing made of? So if you begin with a wooden table, you would go down to the cellulose and get down to the cells, get down to the molecules, finally get down to the atoms, and then see the whole thing is built up out of the atoms. So that's one kind of explanation that he encouraged. And then he also had a formal cause. That is, the world, everything of matter is always formed. It has a shape. It has characteristics. It has qualities. Form refers to all of that kind of thing, not just the shape. And so to understand something is to understand its form, and then you want to understand why does it have this form rather than another form. And that would lead you into final causes. Final causes were the function of something. What does it accomplish? Now, much of the science of the late Middle Ages was the study of the human body. And so the formal cause of the heart, I'm sorry, I meant to say the final cause of the heart was, of course, to pump the blood through the body. And when one understood why that was so important and so forth, you really understood the heart. Then you could go on and study the liver. You understand functions were the primary topic. And Aristotelians tended to give excessive emphasis to this cause. They tended to quit asking questions when they found out what it was for. So purpose was central to the Aristotelian view of the world, and that included human beings, but also the whole natural world. These were not so sharply separated in medieval thought as they became. And then finally, there is efficient cause. And the efficient cause of something is really what these days we usually mean when we use the word cause. When we use the word cause, we mean, what about the existing situation compelled this outcome? So if you want to know why this pencil moves from here to here, the efficient cause of that is that a breeze blew, or you picked it up and moved it, or something like that. You have an explanation of its motion from one place to another. Now, for modern science, efficient cause is the primary question. As I say, I think if you just say, what caused this, to most people, they would not then go into the analysis of what it's made up of or about its form. They would be wanting to know why it acted as it did, why it moved in the direction that it moved, why it grew larger or smaller. Something of this kind would be primary. So modern science did not exclude the quest for material causes, but and of course, mathematics deals with formal causes, and mathematics plays a huge role in modern science. But still, efficient cause sort of shapes the table. Now, Descartes said, we don't need final causes. We should eliminate interest in final causes. There are no final causes in the world. Or you could, if you want to use the word purpose, that's fine. Nothing happens for a purpose. Now, I think I can quickly illustrate from evolution the difference. If you see that the eyes come into being, and you say the eyes come into being because the organism aims at seeing, that would be a final cause. Well, we don't do that. We ask entirely the questions about the efficient cause. And the efficient cause is very, it's always a material cause. I mean, not the material cause that I've used it. It's a cause by a physical entity, by a material entity. And of course, in evolution, it's pointed out that all kinds of new things are developing, but only the ones that make the entity live longer are communicated to the future. Survival of the fittest, rather than the purpose of seeing, explains the rise of the eye. That's modern science. And they learned much more than the medieval had learned by looking at final causes. So please don't take this as a put down. Nevertheless, it is an abstraction from the totality. Aristotle was right. Purposes do play a role in the world. And there's plenty of evidence for that even in evolutionary thought. but we can come to that kind of thing later. But once you have gotten rid of purposes, you have gotten rid of freedom. If everything that happens now happens because of the way the world was a moment ago, you can explain every movement, every growth, every shrinking, every improvement, everything else by knowing what the factors were that had efficient cause upon what happened. Then determinism is the only possible outcome. And so the modern world, even though I don't think Descartes said, we want to be deterministic, I don't think that language is found. Nevertheless, we want to explain the efficient cause of everything. That is already to say. Now, of course, when Descartes said that, he said the soul is a complete exception. All the things he said about what we shouldn't do and what we should do were about the natural world. And the knower, the one who is doing the talking, the one who is doing the explaining, operates on entirely different patterns. The animals belong entirely to this completely, efficiently explained world. So he made a very sharp distinction between the human soul and everything else. And as long as he did that, he would have certainly said human beings are responsible for what they do. In other words, human beings make decisions that have effects. So first, before I go to the human, let's just say it's very hard to believe if you have a pet dog that this dog is operating purely in terms of efficient causes. For modern science, this becomes clearer as we go forward, but it's already present in Descartes. The animal does not have any interiority, doesn't have any subjectivity. He said animals behave the way they do. It's the same as the Strasbourg clock. The Strasbourg clock, every hour, maybe more often, figures come out and dance around the clock. They're usually human figures. So you can see that a machine can perform all kinds of behavioral forms. And he said animals are part of that. Clockwork was his favorite language. Now, not all modern science would limit it to clockwork, so don't misunderstand me, but Descartes gave a kind of special status to clockwork, nature as clockwork. A dog's movements are explained by the principles of clockwork. So again, this is one of those things where people never have really believed what was being taught. But on the one hand, the university, as it increasingly became influenced by science, taught that the dog was clockwork. Nobody believed it, almost nobody. It's said that some of Descartes' followers nailed dogs to the floor. But other people revolted by that. Now, they said, oh, well, it's just the same as a squeaking door. You don't get bothered by that. I'm just saying the vast majority of people never believed that their pets were what the scientists told them they were. But on the other hand, that view has had a great influence. I would say the way that the meat industry today manufactures meat is justified by the view that animals are clockwork. if you just reflect about the experience of the animals, no one would say animals have a great time in the way we produce them. So it's this double take. On the one hand, we know animals are much more like us than the science says, at least that they don't have interiority is what the science says. We know they do. We know they have feelings, emotions, purposes, and that these play a large role in what they do. But we've studied one thing in school, the other thing we know at home. There's been no coherent inclusion. Well, one may get along with that dualism for a while, but then came evolution, and Darwin showed that we had evolved out of animals. We are part of the animal world. We are not, there was no one point at which suddenly we became something radically different. And the net result of that was that there were two choices. One choice I think was very sensible, and it really gave the West a chance to get itself back together again in a sane way. And that was saying, if we are part of nature, nature is richer than we had been taught. If we are part of nature, nature has subjectivity, feelings, purposes, imagination. And how much of this the dog has is another question. But you can't just saying it has zero of this is totally unconvincing. And to go from zero to all this in one moment somewhere, when humans appeared, nobody could really believe that. So the radical dualism of the first part of modernity had to end. And if human beings are able to say, we have feelings, we have purposes, even the people who are announcing that there is no purpose in the world have the purpose of persuading people that there is no purpose in the world. To actually, you can't help but believe that there are purposes. So they said, this is called neo-naturalism, and it came into being in the discussions after Darwin. My teachers at Chicago were all neo-naturalists. To me, this is just a common sense. But neo-naturalism lost the battle so far as universities are concerned. So far as standard university understanding of science, and science is understood as the way of learning the facts, our purposes play no role in what happens in the world. Our feelings play no role in what happens in the world. They have no causal effect. They are not efficient causes. Nothing subjective could have. So that's the standard position. I think it's crazy. We all know it's false, but we are busily teaching it to our children. And the longer a person studies in school, especially if they get a PhD, they will at least know that in their field, to introduce human purpose as an explanatory factor into anything that happens would be totally unacceptable. The Guild will not tolerate it. At the same time, everybody in the Guild knows that. I'm sorry, you understand, I just think that this kind of insanity, teaching one thing while you believe another, yes. Wait a minute.
I wonder if you could speak a little bit to, well, these professors aren't stupid. Like, I've read these philosophers, many of them are very smart, that accept this worldview. What is the interest in accepting a worldview you know inherently is flawed? Why do people who examine it continue to promote this kind of worldview?
Well, as long as our colleges were liberal arts colleges, this didn't happen much. But even what are called liberal arts colleges can only get their faculty, because they want PhDs, as PhDs in one or another academic discipline. I think historically the takeover, the shift from liberal arts to academic disciplines, which took place around the middle of the last century, is what explains the outcome. And when Harvard University declares itself to be a value-free research university, it's simply saying we consist only of academic disciplines, and the academic disciplines were created for the purpose of advancing a certain kind of research in a narrow field. They were never developed for the purpose of benefiting students. The liberal arts had that purpose, but the loss of the liberal arts to the academic disciplines was a fundamental move. Once you get the academic disciplines, you get the guilds. And the guild's job is to protect the academic discipline. And if you violate the rules of the guild, you can be excommunicated. Universities do a lot of excommunicating now. Churches do very little. But so a few people do it and get excommunicated. My friends do it. But that means the end of teaching. So in order to maintain a teaching position, you have to abide by the rules of the guild.
What is the purpose of the guild? What are they trying to? What's their end? What skin do they have in this game?
The people who
Is it like capitalism? Like they want to create.
I really think,
Workers?
yeah. The commitment is usually to the academic discipline. And sometimes people will go to great lengths and sacrifice a great deal and take great risks. Für die Wissenschaft. The Wissenschaft is the German term. And the Wissenschaften were created in the early 19th century so as to advance research. And I think it's perfectly all right to have a few universities that do nothing but prepare people for research, but to have turned the whole of our educational institutions over to the Wissenschaften was an act of insanity. But if you say why, I don't think you can say it's money, except it is the desire to have prestige, and prestige is prestige in a discipline. But I don't think that, I can't see this as something deep in the human soul that just cannot be uprooted. I think a lot of people in a lot of disciplines would like to feel that there was some higher goal in life than promoting research in this discipline. But a few of them are true believers. I'm not answering your question. A lot of things, I think money is the explanation. But money is important here only in order to get a promotion in your academic job. I don't think it's. Now, there are some stories about outside interests influencing some of these things. And the academic discipline of economics may have come into being to counter certain influences in the public world and to get everybody to agree that the only value is increase of economic activity. Because there were some people once upon a time who thought the economy might exist for making humanity better off. That kind of heresy is. But at the same time, everybody knows it should be that. You understand this? This is doubleness. But if we focus simply on the fact that given this doubleness, a part of what is inherent in, I think, the teaching of all of the guilds is that everything can be explained by efficient causes. Purpose plays no role, and values play no role. And obviously, I want to say that's wrong, so I want to give a defense of freedom. Yes.
Are you saying then that this determinism, this deterministic view, is convenient for purposes of research? It fosters research. It's amenable to research in ways that values and these softer concepts are not.
For a certain kind of research, which is what we usually mean by research, yes. Yes. No, the academic disciplines are very good at increasing the amount of information we have in a narrow channel. The question of whether information in that narrow channel is very useful when you don't take into account relevant information in other channels means I'm unwilling to just say, yes, it has been a wonderful explosion of information. It's a very specific kind of information which may distract attention from other kinds of information. And since I think that if you just were open to the evidence, you would have to take a lot of parapsychology, for example, seriously, but that it runs against the principles of all of these sciences. So there are a lot of topics the university simply can't deal with because of that. So yes, it increases the amount of information we have. There's no doubt that they're very successful. And obviously some of the breakthroughs that take place in physics and biology and so forth have enormous effects, some of it very beneficial. Unfortunately, when you don't let values count at any point along the way, generally the major research efforts are paid for by people who want to benefit from them. I mean, if you want to have a research project in almost any field, you have to find somebody who has some interest in getting the results. So just free research in a topic just because it seems important to you is very rare today. But it does happen. Universities have not excluded it completely. Okay, well, I want to also be sure you understand there's a kind of natural process of reasoning that leads in a deterministic direction. I could start and say, why did you feel that way about it? You understand, you keep going, why? And eventually you're likely to end up, well, my brain just seems to be fixed that way or something. It's very hard to answer a why question unless you just flatly say, I took this course because I decided to. Then, of course, I can ask why you decided to, and you may be able to give me some reasons, but you finally just say there was more than one possibility. I could have made a different decision, but I just decided to do it. That is not considered an explanation in the modern world. But I think it is an explanation. And I'm going to give you the first introduction into Whitehead, because Whitehead brought purpose back into philosophy. And again, a philosophy that needs no sharp boundary over against science. Okay, I'm going to just draw one little, I'm not much of a diagrammer, but I will try. There is a line like this that means that an event taking place here, everything that happened between here and here, whoops, 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 bears on this. Nothing that happens in the past is totally irrelevant to the present. And if we're thinking now of the present in terms of a moment of your experience, obviously some of these strands are far more important than others. And the strand of your own past experience would probably be generally the most important. Although if someone has just followed a bullet in your direction, the impact of that bullet may take the place of that as being the most important. But if you take the whole of the present experience, it is some kind of a synthesis of everything that has ever happened in the past. And all of that then would lead to a deterministic outcome. To whatever extent you explain what's happening now in terms of what happened in the past, the explanation is not found in the moment, not found in the event itself, it's found before it. So the question is whether, in addition to all of this, anything else is playing a role in the present. And from Whitehead's point of view, the answer is clearly yes, there's something else playing. Everything back here, these are all actually existent things. I mean, they were existent. And their relationship to this event is what Whitehead calls a physical relationship. So there are physical feelings of all of this. And physics studies those physical feelings. And if you know that you are restricting to one aspect of the whole, there's absolutely nothing against that. Physics learns an enormous amount by concentrating on the past. And not just physics, same thing would be true of biology and even psychology and so forth and so on. But Whitehead thinks in addition to these physical feelings, there are also conceptual feelings. Now, he was a mathematician, and mathematicians are constantly dealing with concepts. So he also calls what we're dealing with potentials. In addition to all the actuals, there are also potentials. And I think it's very easy to say you do imagine things. And you may think very rigorously about very abstract questions in mathematics. And to identify those with physical feelings, they don't seem to be feelings of events or of material things. They are feelings of abstractions. Or the problem with abstraction would mean that it's abstracted from something. And the potential doesn't have to be abstracted from the actual. The potential is just something that is possible. So this is, I don't mean that no one in all of modern thought has dealt with these kinds of questions, but over against the dominant push of the scientific community to focus entirely upon the role of past actuality in explaining the present, Whitehead is distinctive by saying what comes into being in this moment is a synthesis of what has previously happened with what might happen with forms. And I mentioned mathematics just to indicate the university has paid attention to forms. It has very rarely paid much attention to our feeling of the forms. I don't mean that you can't find some of that, but it has not been the focus. Now, Whitehead says that whereas in dealing with the past, the amount of effect that particular past things have is largely due to their weight in the past and their relevance to the present and so forth. But it is also influenced by one's present apprehension of potentials. So even even what one might call the physical aspect of the present moment is influenced by the feelings that we have of potentials. And the potentials come to us ordered in terms of relevance. Well, I'm going to just jump and say these are questions to be dealt with phenomenologically, and phenomenology is not completely excluded from universities. But what does happen with our feelings of what might be, of what may be? And I will just jump to my own answer. I wrote in a book some time ago called God and the World, in which I said one phenomenon that I think characterizes vaguely, slightly, all of our experience is what I wanted to call the call forward. There's some sense of being drawn toward something. Whitehead at one point says every living thing wants to continue to live, and it wants to live well, and it wants to live better. So there is the call to the better, what one thinks of as being the better. And I was reassured years later when I discovered that the greatest phenomenologist, or at least many people think he was the greatest phenomenologist of the 20th century, Martin Heidegger, had also identified der Ruf nach vor as a fundamental part of human experience. Der Ruf means the call, and nach vor means forward. So at least I wasn't inventing it with, I get support. But if this is true, if there is a call forward, and if the nature of that call has some effect upon the weighting, it doesn't make anything excluded, but some parts of the past would seem more accented in order to achieve that. Then the idea that in every moment of our experience, we make a decision about just how to put together all of these past influences in light of the potentials that we want to realize. Now, if this is the correct analysis, and I think it does justice to my experience of myself, then we do make a decision. And what decision we make is what determines exactly what will happen. Now, you can of course flatly deny it and say, no, our aspirations, our fears, our sense of possibilities play no role whatsoever in what we become moment by moment, what our experience is. But I don't think you can get a phenomenological support for that. I think phenomenologically that purposes, if we get back to the word that started off this, that our purposes in the moment are not totally determined simply by the past. They are also influenced by our apprehension of possibilities in the present. Yes.
I'm just trying to clarify a little bit.
Yes,
So,
please.
would it be fair to say that the possibilities are limited by the sort of datum that we get that we apprehend? So that
yes.
in some ways,
No.
our choices are determined.
Our
We have a choice among a select few determined possibilities.
Absolutely. No, our choices are limited. The notion of being totally free so that I could decide the next moment I will be in my bed at home. That is not, that does not take account. There's nothing about our freedom that can eliminate the influence of the past. And one of the most important things to bring in has multiple causes. There's never a case when you can totally explain why a child is doing what the child is doing now because of something that happened yesterday. Now, maybe something that happened yesterday plays a very large role in the explanation, but this need to be exhaustive or something, or to pretend that one thing is exhaustive. The worst example of this has been in theology, because in order to honor God or something, I don't really, I have a hard time understanding it, but it's a huge thing. God has been declared to be omnipotent. This was the most stupid thing ever done in Christian theology, but it's done over and over and over and over again, even after. If God has all the power, then nothing else has any power at all. And in that case, since power is the ability to make other things that have power do things, God doesn't have any power either. The notion of omnipotence reduces the power of God to zero. But it's still considered a great honor that God is omnipotent. But you see, this idea that God could be the sole cause of anything that happens, that's one of the main reasons that God has gotten kicked out from all sorts of places with much justification. That notion of God is completely incompatible with science. Because scientists are studying causes and they are really finding them. The fact that they go from the omnipotence of God to the omnipotence of the past is, from my point of view, very sad. But also, if you say God is omnipotent, then of course you don't make any decisions at all. Your whole life is just somehow making actual what it had to be. Nobody really believes it. We can be just as crazy with our theological ideas as we can with our supposedly scientific ideas. But I believe very strongly that God plays a role in every moment of my life. But God is only one of many, many things. And what I do in my life is by no means determined by God. God becomes the great sinner once you have said God is omnipotent.
Becomes a great
Sinner.
sinner.
Well, or else you can say there's no such thing as sin. But if there is any such thing as sin, God's doing it. Yeah. I don't see why that's such a compliment to God. But yes.
I'm just thinking about religions. I don't think I need that thing, do I? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
People are online. I didn't even know that. Now, in terms of religion, I think of my own family, where we have Catholics and born agains and Seventh Day, all these different religions.
Yeah.
I've come to believe that a person, any one of us sitting here, we latch onto a religion because it suits our needs. It helps us to get through life and to understand things. And I think that when you talk about, God's responsible for everything, that's just a way of looking at whatever happened.
But it doesn't help us understand anything.
Right. It's the prime unknowable, is what one of my 17-year-old friends said years ago. We don't know.
Okay, but I think we could know if we wouldn't put such an obstacle in the way of knowing. As
Okay,
making up ideas about God that have no basis in the Bible. Yeah. Anyway.
No thanks.
Yeah. Yes.
One more clarifying
Yes.
question. Would it be accurate to say that the initial aim is sort of analogous with what final cause, to describe what something's final cause is?
Oh, yes.
Yes?
Yes. Yes, and the initial aim is Whitehead's term for the call, what I'm calling the call forward. Yes.
I've been reading a fellow by the name of Wolfgang Smith, and in his taxonomy, there are physical causes, horizontal causes,
Yes.
which we really deal with
Yes.
in science. But he also has a notion of a vertical cause.
Okay.
And the key vertical cause is life itself. I mean, you know, the fact that there is living things. I mean, science has not been able to explain life, but I mean, there are others, but I mean, he would attribute that to God.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it is, if horizontal and vertical helps you, fine. It would confuse me to say life is vertical. By vertical, you mean coming from God rather than from the world? I'm trying to understand what.
Well, if we look at life as a phenomenon,
Yes.
I mean, science has been able to play around with life.
Yes.
We can play around with genes.
Yes.
But we cannot create life. The fact that life exists itself is something that science has not been able to touch.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's an epiphenomenon, like consciousness, for example.
Well, many scientists would say they can explain life. But I think on the topic of consciousness, this is a bugaboo for almost all scientists. They can't really, they're ending up with a dualism after all the efforts to get rid of it. Now it's called the dualism between nature and consciousness, because they can't quite deny that they are conscious. But they want to insist that consciousness has no causal effect in the world. It's an admission without. From my point of view, it's very interesting that Whitehead says there's no such thing as consciousness. What there is conscious experience. Now, there's experience, and much of our experience is not conscious. And Whitehead thinks that the whole world is made up of experience, most of which is not conscious. So we can ask the question, what is the change that occurs when consciousness begins very, very faintly to appear and then appear rather vividly? Consciousness is also a matter of degree. So Whitehead thinks we can explain it. But if we'll get back to this in dealing with other topics, but if we really understand that the one thing we know anything about is experience, then we can explain a whole lot of things. Since science has been based on the idea that the one thing we know best are the objects of experience. And in fact, it's overwhelmingly the objects of sight. It's very interesting that David Hume, who is recognized universally as a very, very brilliant philosopher, could not find efficient cause in his experience. And he only talks about visual experience. He doesn't say that's all he's going to talk about, but it's in fact all that he talks about. And so cause just has to be a word we use for the relationships that we see repeatedly. But he's wrong. And Immanuel Kant then says causality is something that the human brain contributes inevitably to relationships. One of the many, many ways in which the modern world makes stupid statements when they could so easily become more sensible. We experience the causality of our past experience in our present experience. And that's the only causality. I mean, that's the basic causality that we do know something about. But when we are listening You see, if instead of limiting philosophy to sight, the data of philosophy, we say we're also interested in hearing, and you are hearing the end of a word, at the time you're hearing the end of the word, the hearing of the earlier part of the word is functioning in your experience. So we know that what we experienced a moment ago plays a role in what we're experiencing now. And that's a causal, efficient role. So I think that efficient causality is a very good idea, but it doesn't relate the objects of experience. It relates experiences to each other. Obviously, we'll come back to this topic. It's absolutely central. The whole of modern thought is based on the idea that the objects of experience are more real than the experience. I don't know any reason for thinking that. They're more material. And if you know that matter is the only reality, then you could argue for that. But these are very arbitrary assertions. It's, to me, very sad that science doesn't have really any use for matter. The closest it gets is mass. So there's still many, many scientists who want to say mass is fundamental and energy, for example, is secondary. But there's lots of energy in the universe where there is no mass. It seems to me very obvious that energy is more fundamental than mass. And energy is not a substance. Yeah, energy has an event character. If scientists would give up the notion that material objects have to be foundational to reality and simply go by the evidence that energy is what is fundamental to reality, energy events are fundamental to reality, then we wouldn't have to have this radical separation between mainstream science and what happens when you get below the quantum, get down to the quantum level, because they both can be understood in terms of energy events. I'm just, all of this is just to say, let's free ourselves from the slavery of the past in science and in philosophy and just look at the evidence. And I think the fact we can simply appeal to the evidence as requiring a new science and a new philosophy should make it not too difficult. But I really get upset by the fact that universities will not be self-critical. They will not deal with the history of their own ideas and will not deal with metaphysics, because these are the ways of liberation. The study, even 50 years ago, there was lots of study of the history of physics. And people who've studied the history of physics can be ready to say, okay, that worked very well to advance physics for a while. Now we have new evidence, we need to do it differently. But, okay. Are there other questions? We have just 5 minutes left, so. If there are no questions, I will say a word again about meaninglessness. Now, it's very difficult to say just what does the word meaning mean, because obviously it has many, many uses. When I ask somebody what they mean by the vertical, they can give me an explanation, and perfectly good. We can do a lot. But the meaning of life is something quite different. And the meaning of life in a world where there are no purposes is very hard to formulate in a convincing way. If you once recognize that there are purposes and that one may purpose to act in ways that are beneficial to oneself and others, and one may also purpose to act in ways that are destructive of others for the sake of the self, or even destructive of the self for the sake of others. I mean, all of these are are possible purposes, then the choice of what purposes by which to act has a kind of inherent meaningfulness. It seems to have some importance. Now, that may not be enough to give people a strong sense of meaning. In my view, when we tell young people about all of the things that are going wrong and that there's very little we can do about it, it's very difficult for them to find meaning in a world that's just going to pieces and they're told they can't do much about it. If we can tell people that yes, there are terrible dangers facing us, and many of them it's too late to prevent. They're being actualized. But we can make a huge difference if we can build up some small communities that can survive all the horrors that are to come. We may be able to begin the construction of the new world that can follow the present. I think there's a good chance people will find that it's meaningful to be engaged in saving that much of the world from self-destruction. So, number one, we have to say there's some freedom. We can't say there's some freedom unless there are some purposes. And then we need to spend time with proposals of things people could do, children can do. And we're having some wonderful examples of children's leadership in the world. I think that can help. Yes.
Could you speak a little bit to how we know what the correct or moral or least problematic possibility we choose, how we determine that? It seems like, where do we add the moral value to a decision? You know, if you can take three possibilities, how do we decide? I want to say I understand how we decide it subjectively. I'm more interested in deciding, like, how do we know what God wants, and how do we know what is the moral thing, the moral choice to make?
We won't be able to answer that really now, but I will. In my view, this is the heart of Christian spiritual life, is distinguishing between what the past is trying to persuade me to do, and where there is a sense of something new that can happen that I'm being called for. And I don't think there are any rules for this. It's known as grace. And fortunately, it keeps coming, whether we make mistakes or not, and we make constant mistakes. But we also often have the sense we could have done better. We often, it's not that we don't know what we are called to do. It's just that's too much trouble, too hard. Okay, folks, I think we have used up our time, and thank you very much for coming. And to those of you who I don't see, I hope this has made sense to you in some way and been stimulating to your thinking. But please send emails in to help me know what you're responding.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
We'll see you next week.
My dad's a dad. Yeah, Mike Zorro. He works, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
at City Hall now, LA City Hall.